Chapter 15. Meanwhile, Christmas was coming. Holly and Maxu had no time for chatting now. They both worked feverishly to create enough dolls for the mortal children on Christmas Day. Thelahima's 6 hands were a blur as he assembled arms and legs with lightning speed. Only Mraka moved at a normal pace. Methodically, he buttoned small cloaks on dresses, tied shoes, and arranged hats delicately on shining hair. The row of smiling dolls grew longer and longer. It was 4 days before Christmas, and they only needed 400 more. 399 more. 398 more. "10,544 finished," trumpeted Thelahima, "and 382 to go." Holly and Maxu were applauding themselves when the door opened and Nicholas entered the workshop. He stopped in the doorway, surprised. "Who's that woman?" he wondered. It was Holly, stepping briskly across the shop to set a finished doll upon the shelf for firing, and then swirling around to begin another at her little table. Her coppery hair was bundled back with a large green silk scarf. It was really the makings of a doll dress, and her cheeks were flushed with excitement. Her long hands were covered with porcelain dust, and she did not so much walk across the room as dance. "She's a grown-up," Nicholas thought. "She's not a child anymore. How much longer can we keep her with us?" His thoughts were interrupted by Holly's cry of greeting. "Papa, did you see? Look how many we've made." "And all of them unique," said Nicholas with delight. "Every single one has a different expression, a different character. You've wrought marvels, you four." She's wrought marvels," a creaky voice said. It was Mraka. He pointed his chin at Holly. "I've not seen the like before." "I'm pleased that she's won your good opinion, Mraka," said Nicholas, beaming. Mraka nodded. That was enough of speaking. "Thank you, Mraka." Holly leaned over and whispered in his ear. He smiled a thin smile and bent over his work again. "Sire!" cried a voice outside the workshop. "Yes, in here," called Nicholas, opening the door. "Come in, my dear farmer." A tall, oddly dressed man bustled in, bearing a sheaf of papers all covered with extensive calculations. "This just in," he said, his high voice somewhat muffled by, coincidentally, a muffler. Bright eyes peeped in from under a straw boater, which was kept from blowing off by a long velvet cord. This was Horatio Thaddeus Farmer, the uncannily accurate meteorologist of the land of the immortals, who felt that it was his duty to keep Nicholas apprised of all weather conditions anywhere on Earth at all times. "I must inform the king," was his favorite slogan, and he was continually bustling off to the castle for what he called royal consultations. Most immortals edged away from Farmer when he began to talk cumulus and cirrus, but Nicholas found him deeply entertaining and welcomed him into the castle's study with a look of serious consideration that brought joy to Farmer's heart. Now, quivering in excitement, he began to gesture wildly with his papers. "I thought you should know, sire. An unforeseen cold front will descend upon the North American mortals tomorrow, bringing snow and ice destined to last until Christmas Eve. Most unusual to see such a vast expanse of cloud cover. Really quite odd." A shadow of perplexity crossed Farmer's face, but he recovered himself with a dry cough. "The entire eastern portion of the United States, always excepting the state of Florida," here Farmer sniffed, "can therefore expect a white Christmas. In the Western Territories," he refused to call them states, "it will be snowing in the Empire City," Holly broke in. Farmer glared in irritation over the top of his glasses at this intrusion, then recognized the speaker and bowed hurriedly. "Yes, your highness, snowing copiously." "How cold will it become?" "Well below freezing every night, your highness," simpered Farmer. "And during the days?" "Quite cold. Not perhaps always freezing, but still quite cold, if it pleases your highness," he added with a flourish. "Oh, it does, Mr. Farmer, it does," Holly said with shining eyes. She turned to her father. "Papa," she said urgently, "did you hear?" Fighting the dread in his heart, Nicholas tried to maintain an even tone. "Yes, my dear, it will be a white Christmas in the Empire City, New York City." "Papa," her entreaty could be read upon her face. "Couldn't I try?" "Try what, my dear?" said Nicholas with false heartiness. You know, Papa, Holly said. You know. Take me with you on the Christmas Eve journey. Please. Please. A swarm of contending fears chased one another through Nicholas's mind as he watched his daughter's eyes search his face for hope. It's impossible, thank God. We've tried it before. It can't work, so there's no harm in attempting it. But what if we succeed? Then what will I do? She can't come. She can't. Her heart couldn't stand it. But it will be cold. Perhaps not cold enough. Farmer's been wrong before. And Heracon, if he learns she's there, he will do everything in his power to find her. It would be so easy for him among the mortals. He could kill her there. No, he barked suddenly, surprising everyone. Never! Like any weatherman, Thaddeus Farmer recognized an impending storm when he saw one. I'll just take myself off, he called shrilly. Your Royal Highness, my humblest respects to the Queen. Good day. He bolted for the door. Thelahima, Maxu, and even Raka looked at one another in consternation and invented emergencies in the storerooms that required their immediate attention. As the last Gilfin arm disappeared down the stairs, Holly turned to her father. Upon her cheeks burned 2 bright spots, and her eyes seemed to spark like fireworks. Still, her voice was steady when she said, Please explain your answer, Papa. It's a strange truth that no matter how persuaded we might be of our own correctness, the discomfiting realization that others disagree with us causes a paralyzing inability to argue the case convincingly. It won't work, Nicholas began, foolishly beginning with his weakest link. We've tried it before. What's the harm in trying again? Perhaps because I am your daughter, I might have a chance. Nicholas saw that he'd begun badly, but he couldn't seem to put it right. No, it's too dangerous for you in the mortal world. Your heart, Holly interrupted eagerly. But you heard Mr. Farmer, below freezing snow. Papa, I go out here in the winter. There's no reason why it should be any different there. No! What would we do if you fainted? How could I get you to safety? Do you expect me to endanger Christmas for the children? I say no. It's too dangerous. Papa, said Holly, struggling to keep calm. Are you frightened that Heracon will... At the sound of the name he dreaded on her lips, Nicholas felt his composure crumble. His response was hasty and wrong-headed. No, I forbid it, he snapped. Holly had never been angry in her life, but she was angry now. She caught her father by his sleeve. Forbid it? How can you? How can you dismiss me and my dreams as if they were dust? Her eyes were fierce. You can't forbid it, and you can't stop me. Neither you nor Heracon will stop me from going to the Empire City if I can. She turned on her heel and ran out of the workshop, leaving Nicholas fuming, not at his daughter, but at himself. 2 hours later, Holly was wrapped in her mother's embrace. Several damp handkerchiefs lay crumpled among their skirts, but Holly had stopped crying now. She leaned back and looked lovingly at her mother's face. It's Heracon, I know it, she sighed. Viviana shivered at the name. Yes, she agreed. Your father's frightened for you, that's all. But you're frightened about him too, and yet you're not so unreasonable. Viviana smiled a little sadly. Only because I know it will do me no good. If I could stop you by being unreasonable, darling, I would do it. But I know that if you see a chance to journey to the mortal world, you will take it, regardless of the danger. Holly was quiet. Her mind was wandering back to the edges of that horrible night long ago, the blurry instants summoned from the darkest caverns of her memory, falling down, down, while the wind above her screamed. No, she said, stopping herself. I can't stay here for eternity because I'm frightened of him. That would make me a coward and a failure, not an immortal. Absently, she pulled at the fringe of Viviana's silken shawl. Viviana's arms tightened around her daughter. If only I could just keep you right here like this, she murmured. But you can't, I hope. Holly smiled at herself. I keep reminding myself that this is just speculation. For all I know, I'll never get out to the land of the immortals. I'll never get out of the land of the immortals. Viviana gave her a penetrating look. That's what you know, but what do you feel? I feel certain that I'm going to make a journey to the Empire City, Holly confessed. Yes, said her mother, so do I. Nobody else can leave the land of the immortals, but somehow it seems absolutely certain that you will, she sighed. I will come back, Mama. I promise I will, said Holly. If you can, Viviana added silently. Aloud, she said, look at you. You're a woman now. Holly shook her head. Sort of. I still feel like a child most of the time. So do I. And I'm over 1,000 years old. Do you? Holly glanced up quickly. I always thought when girls get married, that's when they start feeling grown up. No, darling. If anything, you feel more like a child than ever when you fall in love, answered Viviana. Really? Said Holly, frowning. I wonder. Her voice trailed off. If you'll ever fall in love? Viviana finished her sentence. Holly blushed. What does it feel like? She asked hesitantly. Viviana twirled a strand of Holly's hair around her finger while she thought. It feels like time has stopped. She paused. It feels like you're shaking with excitement. It feels like you're more alive than anything in the world. It feels like a secret. Holly stared at the tips of her toes without seeing them. A secret, she repeated dreamily. Then, suddenly shy, she pulled Viviana's shawl over her head. How do you know for certain? Viviana smiled compassionately at her hidden daughter and pulled the shawl from her head. How do you know that you're in love? You know. It's a song that only the two of you will hear. She laughed softly. Wait here. Viviana rose from the chair and disappeared into the next room. When she returned, she was carrying a crystal box that held 1,000 prisms dancing with flecks of color as a couple waltzed on crystal ice. She handed it to Holly, who gazed in wonder at the extraordinary object. What is it? Holly asked breathlessly. A music box. Your father gave it to me. I was mortal then, and young, and I had many suitors. One day, at a harvest festival, I saw your father and thought I had never known such a wise face. He was standing next to an oak tree, and when he saw me looking at him, he reached into its branches and drew out this box. I came closer, though I was not supposed to talk to men my father didn't know, and I heard the most wonderful, indescribable music. All I wanted was to listen to that music and look at your father forever. The music wrapped us in magic, and we began to dance, and Viviana chuckled. My friends thought I had gone mad because they could hear nothing. Oh my, how they laughed at me. But I didn't care. I didn't care about anything but him after that. She sat with a gentle smile, lost in memories. Holly reached out a long finger to touch the crystal gently, and her mother placed the box in her hands. Keep it, said Viviana. But you and Papa, don't you want it? Stammered Holly. It has done its work for us. It must be passed on, as it was to your father. Holly looked curious. Who gave it to Papa? Sophia. But that's a long story, which you will hear another time. Take the music box now and keep it for the day when you fall in love. On that day, it will play its music for you. That evening, Holly and Nicholas exchanged apologies and hugs. Holly, worn from her work and the unfamiliar experience of being angry, decided against her usual research excursion. She curled up in her crystal bed, the silver leaves above her whispering lightly, and gazed at the music box that rested on her pillows. Its colors were muted in the shadows of night. Only a few shards of blue and purple glinted under the glassy surface of the box. Euphemia hooted softly in her sleep somewhere above Holly's head, and Alexia wheezed in a distant corner. Outside the palace, the dark sky was scattered with stars. When Holly awoke hours later, the first thing she saw was the music box, radiant with color. Colorful prisms danced upon her pillow and across the bed. Holly looked in sleepy wonder at her own arm, now made exotic with spangles of pink, green, lavender, and golden light. Soon, Holly's silent wonder transformed into a vague yet insistent curiosity. Her room was dark. It was still night. Why was the box glowing so? As the sea serpent of sleep pulled her back into its thick waters, Holly decided she was having a confusing dream. She rolled over and was greeted by another, even more remarkable sight. Her windows, where the black of night had so recently reigned, now displayed a sky of pulsing light. Hundreds of shades of color were ranged across the night in a monumental arch. Holly blinked. She sat up and rubbed her eyes. With growing excitement, Holly tiptoed over to the window and regarded the scene before her. The great glimmering rainbow seemed to emerge from the reflecting pool below and swung out over the land of the immortals in a great bridge of color that had no end. "The boreal rainbow," she breathed. Tundra appeared at her side, his silver coat turned iridescent opal in the light. "The boreal rainbow," he repeated, awestruck. They stared in silence until Holly murmured, "Half round in a long night." Tundra turned toward her questioningly. "Half round in a long night," she repeated. "It's exactly what Emma Lila said. The rainbow is a half circle, and this is December 21st, the longest night of the year." She knew it all along. The two old friends looked at each other for a long moment. Then Holly whispered, "I promise I'll come back." Tundra looked away. "If the curse—" He stopped. "What?" "The curse, Holly. You can only come back if the curse is broken." "Shh," she said, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I'll come back with Papa on Christmas Day. Somehow, I'll come back." "If you can," Tundra thought. One by one, the other friends awoke and learned what had happened. Euphemia was sent out with a message to Meteor to get her sleigh ready at once. Holly rushed about her dressing room, assembling dresses and shoes under Alexia's critical eye. "You can't bring that, dear. No mortal lady wears that color these days," the fox exclaimed. "Lexi, you're not being very helpful," cried Holly distractedly, holding up a blue poplin skirt in one hand and a pair of black boots in the other. "I need 3 dresses that won't look out of place in the Empire City. That's all I care about. You pick them. And shoes and gloves and a hat and petticoats and a nightgown," chanted Alexia. Holly stopped rushing around and stared at the little fox. "How do you know all this? You've never looked through the telescope, not once." Alexia gave the fox's approximation of a shrug. "I just pick it up here and there. Foxes have a keen fashion sense." "Splendid. You choose," Holly said with relief. "I've got to get some porcelain from the schoolroom, and I have to wrap the music box in a petticoat, and then I have to get the portraits of Mama and Papa." Holly spun around the room with a growing stack of precarious items in her arms. "And Sophia?" Tundra eyed Holly's satchel dubiously. "Not too much, Holly. We don't know how much weight the rainbow will bear." I know. But Tundra, I have to take the Book of Forever, don't I? So that I'll know if I've earned my place here?" They all turned to look at the monumental book, its glinting silver cover laden with jewels. Tundra shook his head. "It must weigh as much as you do, Holly." "I have to take it," said Holly. She strode to the table where the book rested and stood before it. "Please, take this journey with me," she said, addressing the volume humbly. There was a soft clap, a sort of reverberation. The massive book lay on its table still, apparently unmoved. But when Holly reached to pick it up, the book flew gracefully into her outstretched arms as though it had the weight and bulk of a silk scarf, which it now did. "Thank you," Holly said, patting the book's covers as the animals goggled in awe. Finally, Lexi finished her selection, and Holly packed the satchel with all the required garments, the music box, the book, the portraits, and a fine porcelain mixture for doll making. Holly spent a long time bent over the clasp, and as she raised her head, her friend saw that her eyes were filled with tears. "Goodbye," she began haltingly. "I'll come back soon." "Goodbye?" they chorused incredulously. "What do you mean, Holly?" cried Alexia. "Are we going with you?" "You can't go without us," cried Euphemia. Empy began to wail. Tundra was silent, his face inscrutable. Holly looked at them all anxiously. "My darling friends, I wish I could take you with me. You know that I do. I shall be so lonely without you on this strange adventure." Her voice shook, and she stopped for a moment, looking at them with tears in her eyes. "I don't know if I can get along without you, for I never have had to before. I will miss you every instant of every day, but I have to look like a mortal, you know?" She dipped her head to look pleadingly into Tundra's eyes. And mortals don't walk about the Empire City with an owl, a penguin, a fox, and a wolf. They simply don't. 8 eyes looked at her with varying degrees of compliance. They understood, but they didn't like it. I'll be back in a few days, Holly reassured them, wiping her damp eyes with her hands. Still, they were silent. I have to write to Mama and Papa, she said hurriedly. While she was penning a note filled with love and apologies and a promise to meet Nicholas in the Empire City on Christmas Eve, she could hear the animals murmuring behind her. Once finished, she turned to find them ranged in a semicircle around her chair. Alexia, who had clearly been elected spokeswoman, stepped forward. We have decided that we cannot let you go alone. Holly began to protest, but she was silenced by a severe look. And we have also decided that Tundra must be the one to make the journey with you. Number 1, he looks like a dog, and mortals are often accompanied by dogs. Number 2, he is the fiercest should you need protection. Number 3, he refuses to stay behind. Holly gave Tundra a lingering look. I can see that it is no use arguing with you. None whatsoever, he said firmly. Then I won't. Holly smiled at Alexia, then at Empy and Euphemia. Thank you for understanding. Empy waddled over and rubbed his head on her knees. I'll be back soon, she said again. Holly was packed cozily in the sleigh with Tundra at her side and her satchel at her feet. 8 young reindeer, led by Meteor, stamped in the snow, impatient to begin the most exciting journey of their lives. Holly glanced back to her window, where her friends, made invisible by the darkness, were certain to be waving her goodbye. She gave a lingering look to the palace itself, its turrets, towers, and wandering walls, the setting of her childhood, the home of everything she knew and loved. Then, her face alight with excitement and hope, she turned forward and grasped the smooth leather reins with fierce strength. To freedom, she said to herself. Aloud, she called out, to the Empire City. The reindeer had been waiting for this moment for years. With a single concerted movement, the deer leaped forward, straining against the tug of gravity. Down the long snow-covered field they ran, their hooves beating heavily against the ground. Up! Cried Meteor. Up now! And in perfect unison, they lifted. Their silvery shapes appeared like ghosts in the reflecting pool, and on they rose into the rainbow that arched over the silent sky. As they lunged through the radiance of the boreal rainbow, there was a quick moment of wondrous warmth, and they emerged resplendent, rainbow deer alive with the hues of the heavens, their hooves trailing glistening rainbows of dust, their bridles alight with prisms and jewels, tossing their color-gilded manes in the wind. They rode on. Soon they approached the gates of forever, locked and silent beneath them on the snow-covered ground. Holly, her eyes fixed on those golden frames, forgot to breathe. Suppose they couldn't get through. But the sleigh sailed smoothly over the boundary that separated the immortal from the mortal world without a shudder or a pause. As her homeland slipped quietly into the distance, Tundra watched the girl he loved assume the majesty of a woman. She did not, as she would have in the past, fling her arms around his neck and seek comfort in his presence. Instead, she sat, straight and firm, the guardian of her own future. Holly, too, felt the transformation that was taking place in her being. With each passing minute, her dreams came closer to reality. She was hungry to embrace the mortal world and begin her work there, to earn the immortality she had been born with, and to free her country from the curse she had brought with her birth. Far away, in a place that was neither now nor forever, but a rotting always, Heracon rose from his pallet. The cold front had been tiring, terribly tiring, but his work was just beginning. It was not in his nature to feel joy. What he felt was triumph. He crossed his iron floor and stood before his mirror, stroking his skin with a scabbed forefinger. Beischlag, rocking in a corner, watched without interest, his limp hands mechanically feeding a softened pink something to his mouth. Heracon whispered, leaning toward his reflection and pulling his lips down over his long teeth. There was nothing he could do about that. "Delighted to make your acquaintance, Miss Claus," he said, his voice deepening, his lips scarcely moving. "Do you plan to stay long in our fair city?" His eyes narrowed critically. "Your presence supplies it with a beauty heretofore unknown to me." He lifted his chin and stared intently at his mouth. "What a charming locket you wear. It is very like one my grandmother wore. May God rest her soul, and bless me." Heracon paused. His tongue had slipped from between his lips. Quickly, he pulled it back. "Bless me. The similarity is remarkable. Would you be so kind as to permit me to inspect it?" He fell silent, satisfied. The color of his mouth was nearly unnoticeable from most angles. Heracon looked at his hands, his yellowed, horn-like fingernails. He raised them to his forehead, dug into his flesh, and pulled. Thick, meaty furrows of skin peeled away. Faster and faster he scraped, his neck, his ears, his scabbed arms and bony shoulders, ripping and tearing the silvery flesh. Underneath all was smooth and glowing with warm human color. A strong face looked back from the mirror, healthy and vigorous. The slits of eyes grew in their sockets until they were wide and clear. His bones melted into recognizable human form, high cheekbones, narrow lips, perhaps a shade too narrow, over a firm chin. The long fingernails retreated to be replaced by meticulously groomed, strong hands. Wincing, Heracon shrunk the iron band, imprisoning his head into a thin wire that bit deeply into his flesh and then camouflaged it with a wealth of hair, perhaps longer than was strictly fashionable. Thick brown locks brushed with silver cascaded over his unlined forehead, and only the most discerning eye could detect the narrow band within. Heracon smiled, keeping his lips closed. The handsome eyes flickered downward, and his tattered robe appeared to melt away, revealing the sober, well-cut jacket and waistcoat of a wealthy New Yorker of the 1890s. Upon his watch fob, the emblems of several distinguished clubs hung unobtrusively. He wore a handkerchief in his pocket, and his discreet silken tie lay on the snowy linen of his shirt. He rattled his penknife in his trouser pockets and took a few steps in the swinging stride of a man of affairs, roaches cracking beneath his shining shoes. He turned back to the mirror with a flourish. He bowed. He reached out a hand, and a black bowler appeared between his fingers. He placed it upon his head, only to sweep it off. "Delighted to make your acquaintance, Miss Claus." He grinned. "Beischlag," he barked. "Do you admire my human beauty?" Beischlag regarded him, his lipless mouth chewing rhythmically. "Your beauty is beyond compare, my lord." Freedom. Holly threw back her head and laughed into the wild openness around her. The wind whirled, buffeting her cheeks and tugging at her hair. Her eyes gazed jubilantly at the mortal world that flashed beneath her. Over the dust of deserts and the jagged limbs of mountains, the reindeer ran. Finally, the flowing rainbow pulled the sleigh above the gray Atlantic toward America, where the first dim sparks of light showed that the Empire City was drawing near. Holly held her breath. Suddenly, the great lady, her arm upflung, was visible in the harbor. Without thinking, Holly stood up in the sleigh. The city of possibilities stretched out beneath her, glowing with light and its own spirit. Snowflakes turned in their gyre like white butterflies, floating into the great avenues and the tiny alleys, falling alike on tall edifices and the tumble-down tenements. The deer, drawing close to their destination, descended from the sky, and before Holly's eyes the city unfolded in wave after wave of extravagance. The Great White Way, glittering with new electric lights, greeted her first and loudest. She could hear the tinkle and clash of riotous music and stamping feet, the roar of laughter and a badly played violin. The jolly confusion of Broadway changed to calls and whistles as they whirled over the shadowy, teeming streets of the Lower East Side. Now they followed the screech and rattle of the elevated rail cars that lurched uptown and into its station, disgorging passengers who looked to Holly's eyes like small brown bears, they were so heavily bundled and befurred. A dazzling gilded dome slid into view. It was Pulitzer's Tower, the tallest building in the world. Before Holly could do more than gasp, the tower was gone, replaced by the transcendent spire of St. Patrick's. Farther on, the scene grew hushed and elegant. Wide, well-kept avenues were lined with mansions, blooming with turrets and towers, pillars and porticos. Over their solemn mansard roofs, Holly flew northward, toward the brick barracks of the new Metropolitan Museum, and then, abruptly, west, to where the snow lay thick upon the hills. Gently, softly, the sleigh landed. Chapter 16.